Hey everyone, and welcome back. You're probably here because you're prepping for the UPSC exams. And let me tell you today, we're tackling a topic that's got everyone buzzing, especially those in the civil services. It's the lateral entry scheme.
Yeah, this scheme has really shaken things up. It's not just a hot topic for current affairs. It really gets to the heart of how India is governed, and that's something you'll definitely need to grapple with for your mains exam.
So let's break it down. What exactly are we talking about when we say lateral entry scheme?
Okay, picture this. You've got the classic path to becoming an IAS or IPS officer, right? Years of studying, cracking the UPSC exam, working your way up the ranks. Well, the lateral entry scheme, or LES, kind of throws a wrench in that system.
How so?
It creates a whole different route. It lets professionals come in from other fields, think private sector academia, you name it, and they can join the government directly at mid-level or even senior positions.
So instead of spending years climbing the ladder, they just kind of parachute in.
Exactly, and that's why it's been so controversial. It's a major departure from how things have always been done. The traditional UPSC exam is all about creating generalist officers who can adapt to different roles. But the LES is more about bringing in specialized expertise.
So it's like saying, hey, we need specific skills right now. Let's get people who are already experts.
Right. The government's argument is that this helps them fill gaps in areas like technology, finance, infrastructure. They're looking for fresh perspectives and innovative solutions.
Sounds good on paper, but we all know it hasn't exactly been smooth sailing. There's been a ton of pushback, especially legal challenges, right?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
The legality of the whole scheme has been questioned from day one. Back in 2020, an IFS officer actually filed a case saying, hey, there's no real legal framework for this.
And that brings us to some really interesting questions about the Indian Constitution, which is great for all you future civil servants out there because this stuff is going to come up in your mains exam.
For sure. This case really highlights the debate around Articles 309 and 310. Article 309 is all about how the parliament and state legislatures are supposed to regulate recruitment and conditions of service for public servants.
So are they saying the LES sidesteps that whole process?
Exactly. But then you've got Article 310, which talks about the doctrine of pleasure. Basically, it says civil servants serve at the pleasure of the president or governor. And the government is using that to justify the LES. They're saying it falls under the president's power to appoint specialists.
So we've got these two interpretations of the Constitution basically being used to argue for and against the scheme. It's like a constitutional tug of war.
It really shows you how complex our legal system can be. And as future civil servants, you'll need to be able to navigate these complexities.
It's not just about knowing the rules, it's about understanding how they can be interpreted and applied in different situations. And this case is a perfect example of that.
And there's another layer to this whole debate, one that touches on a very sensitive issue in India, and that's reservation.
Right, the LES doesn't have the usual quotas for STs, OBCs, and EWS that you see in the regular UPSC recruitment process.
And that's sparked a huge controversy. Critics are saying it could make existing inequalities in the bureaucracy even worse.
Because if you're not actively ensuring representation, then you risk further marginalizing certain groups.
Exactly. It raises all these questions about how we balance the need for specialized expertise with the goal of having a diverse and inclusive civil service.
So it's not just a legal debate or a policy debate. It's a social justice debate.
Right, and it shows how intertwined all these issues really are. No policy exists in isolation. It's always interacting with the larger social and political context.
We've got legal challenges, debates about reservation, and this fundamental shift in how we think about recruitment and expertise. It's clear that the lateral entry scheme is more than just a minor tweak to the system.
It's forcing us to confront some really important questions about how India is governed. And for aspiring civil servants like yourselves, it's a chance to really dive into these complexities.
This kind of analysis will be crucial not just for your exams, but for your future careers as well.
And in the next part of our deep dive, we're going to explore some of the more practical concerns surrounding the LES. Things like the short tenure of lateral entrants, potential conflicts of interest, and the impact on the morale of career bureaucrats.
So stay tuned for part 2, where we'll unpack those issues and look at the arguments both for and against the lateral entry scheme.
Okay, so let's shift gears a bit and talk about some of the practical challenges that have come up with the lateral entry scheme. One of the biggest concerns you hear is about the short tenure of these lateral entrants.
Yeah, these professionals usually come in on a 3-year contract,
Right.
which can be extended to 5. But critics are saying that's just not enough time to really make a difference, especially given how complex the Indian bureaucracy is.
Exactly. Think about it. You're an expert in, let's say, renewable energy, and you join the government. You want to implement some new solar power initiative. But first, you need to understand all the existing policies, figure out the administrative processes, get everyone on board, and then finally, get your project up and running.
That's a lot to squeeze into just a few years.
It is, and it raises questions about accountability. If someone's only there for a short time, how do you hold them responsible for the long-term effects of their decisions? What happens if they leave before a project is finished, or if new problems pop up later on?
So you're saying there's a risk of things getting disrupted and a lack of continuity.
Right. Another big concern, and this is especially relevant for you as future civil servants, is the potential for conflicts of interest.
Because these lateral entrants are coming from the private sector where they might have spent years, sometimes decades, working in specific industries.
Exactly. And it's natural to wonder if their past experiences could influence their decisions within the government. Let's say someone worked in the pharmaceutical industry for a long time and then they joined the Ministry of Health.
Wouldn't there be concerns about whether they might favor policies that benefit their old company or the pharmaceutical industry in general?
Of course, transparency and ethical conduct are absolutely essential in public service. And while there are codes of conduct in place, some people argue that the current systems might not be enough to deal with the unique challenges that lateral entry brings up.
Especially since the vetting process for lateral entrants hasn't always been as thorough as the background checks and vigilance clearances that traditional civil servants go through.
That's an important point. The vigilance clearances for traditional civil servants are really extensive. They involve investigating someone's background financial dealings, any potential vulnerabilities to make sure they're fit to hold sensitive positions. And that hasn't always been the case for lateral entrants.
It seems like with the lateral entry scheme, we're peeling back layers and uncovering all sorts of complexities, each with its own set of implications for how the government functions. And on top of all this, we can't forget about how this is affecting the morale of career bureaucrats. The people who have dedicated their lives to public service through the traditional UPSC route.
Absolutely. Imagine you've worked your way up the ranks for years, gaining experience in different departments, learning the ins and outs of how the government works, and then someone from outside is brought in potentially at a higher salary to take on a leadership role.
I can see how that could lead to some resentment, like they're being overlooked or their experience isn't valued as much.
This clash of cultures between the private sector and the government is a real thing. In the private sector, there's a big emphasis on speed efficiency, measurable results. But the government operates within a much more complex framework with regulations, procedures, political considerations. It's not always easy to reconcile those two worlds.
It sounds like it takes a lot of effort to blend those two cultures. You need open communication, a willingness to learn from each other. If not, you risk creating divisions and undermining the whole point of collaboration and knowledge sharing that the lateral entry scheme was supposed to encourage.
Right. The success of the LES really depends on creating an environment where both career bureaucrats and lateral entrants feel valued, respected, and empowered to contribute what they bring to the table. But, we've talked a lot about the potential downsides, the challenges, the concerns, but it's important to remember that this scheme wasn't just introduced out of nowhere. There must be some strong arguments in favor of lateral entry, too.
Yeah, why did the government feel the need to bring in specialists from outside the traditional system?
Well, one of the biggest reasons, and this is especially true in today's world, is the need for specialized expertise in areas where the existing bureaucracy might be falling behind.
I'm thinking about fields like artificial intelligence, cybersecurity, data analytics, all those areas that are changing so rapidly.
Exactly. It makes sense that the government would want to bring in people who are at the cutting edge of these fields. And it's not just about keeping up with technology. Think about the challenges of managing a fast-growing economy, dealing with climate change, navigating complicated global situations. These issues need a wide range of skills and perspectives that you might not always find within the traditional generalist approach of the civil services.
So the argument is that lateral entry isn't just about filling a gap in knowledge. It's also about bringing in fresh ideas, new ways of solving problems, and maybe a more dynamic approach overall.
Right. And we can't forget about the issue of manpower. The Indian Express actually reported a significant shortage of IAS officers with thousands of vacancies. That puts a huge strain on the existing officers and can make it hard to implement policies and programs effectively.
So lateral entry could be seen as a way to address that staffing shortage, at least in the short term. But it's not just about filling empty positions, right?
Yeah.
There's also this idea that lateral entry can shake things up a bit, break through some of the bureaucratic inertia that can happen in big government systems.
Yes. Bringing in people with experience from different sectors can challenge the status quo, introduce new ways of thinking, and potentially lead to more efficient and effective governance.
It's almost like introducing a new element into an ecosystem. It can create new dynamics and lead to a more adaptable system.
That's a great way to put it. And it's important to remember that diversity of thought and experience is valuable in any organization, especially one as big and complex as the Indian government.
So we've got these two competing narratives, right? Concerns about short tenures, conflicts of interest, the impact on career bureaucrats. But on the other hand, there's the potential for specialized expertise, innovative solutions, a more dynamic bureaucracy. It's a complicated situation with no easy answers.
Definitely. And in the final part of our deep dive, we'll look at some potential solutions and ways forward. We'll discuss ideas like the dual entry system, relaxing age limits, specialized training for lateral entrants, and even the idea of IAS and IPS officers getting experience in the private sector.
Okay, so we've spent a lot of time digging into the lateral entry scheme. We've looked at the good, the bad, the complicated. It's clear there's no easy answer.
Yeah.
But knowing all this, what do we do now?
Yeah.
How do we move forward in a way that makes the most of lateral entry while still addressing the concerns that have been raised?
That's the big question, right? Well, the good news is there are a lot of smart people out there thinking about this, and they've come up with some potential solutions that could make the LES work better. One idea that I find particularly interesting is this concept of a dual entry system. It was proposed by former RBI Governor D. Subbarao.
Yeah, that was mentioned in the Indian Express article. Can you explain how that would work?
Sure. Basically, you'd have two separate paths into the higher levels of the civil services. The traditional UTSC route would still be there for people entering in their mid-20s. The focus would be on developing those well-rounded generalist administrators. But alongside that, you'd have a specific lateral entry track designed for experienced professionals, maybe people in their late 30s or early 40s.
So instead of having one system, you'd have two running parallel to each other, each with its own strengths and goals.
Exactly. You're not saying one is better than the other. It's about recognizing that both generalist skills and specialized expertise are important for effective governance.
Makes sense. Another suggestion I've heard is to relax the age limits for certain senior positions, like joint secretary roles. The idea is to attract more experienced professionals from the private sector.
Yeah, because right now those age limits can be a barrier for people who might have a decade or more of experience in their field. Relaxing those limits could open up a much larger pool of talent for those higher level roles.
And it could also help with the issue of short tenures. If someone joins at 40, they potentially have another 15 or 20 years to contribute.
Right. There's also been talk about creating a dedicated training academy specifically for lateral entrants.
Oh, that's interesting. What would that look like?
Think of it as a bridge between the private sector and the government. It would give these lateral entrants the knowledge and skills they need to navigate the Indian bureaucracy, understand how policies are made, and adapt to the culture of public service.
Like a crash course in all things government, so they can hit the ground running.
Exactly. It could also be a great way to foster collaboration and knowledge sharing between career bureaucrats and lateral entrants. But it's not just about preparing those coming into the system. What about those who are already there? There's been this really intriguing proposal to let IAS and IPS officers get experience in the private sector.
Wait, so instead of just bringing in people from the outside, you're talking about sending career bureaucrats OUT.
Yeah, the idea is to give them opportunities to take sabbaticals or temporary assignments in private companies or organizations. It would expose them to different ways of working, different decision-making processes. They could learn about new approaches and innovations that they could then bring back to their government roles.
So a two-way exchange of knowledge and experience, breaking down those barriers between the public and private sectors.
It's a pretty bold idea. It really challenges those traditional ideas of what it means to be a civil servant. But it also shows that we need to be more flexible and adaptable in how we approach governance if we want to tackle the challenges of the 21st century.
It seems like we're moving beyond that simple question of is lateral entry good or bad, and starting to have a more nuanced conversation about how to make it work, how to maximize its potential, and address the legitimate concerns that people have.
Exactly. And this conversation needs to involve everyone, policymakers, bureaucrats, academics, and of course, aspiring civil servants like yourselves, because ultimately you're the ones who will be shaping the future of Indian administration.
And that brings it to the most important question. For all of you listening who are preparing for the UPSC exams, how do you see the role of specialized expertise versus the traditional generalist approach? What kind of bureaucracy do you want to be a part of? What skills and perspectives do you think will be most valuable in the years to come?
These are questions worth thinking about as you begin your journey into public service. It's not just about passing an exam, it's about understanding the system you're entering, the challenges you'll face, and the impact you want to have.
So keep learning, keep questioning, and keep engaging with these important debates. The future of Indian administration is in your hands. And if this deep dive into the lateral entry scheme has made you curious to learn more, be sure to check out the Indian Express. They have some great articles that go even deeper into this topic.
And don't forget to hit that like button, subscribe to our channel, and share this episode with your fellow UPSC aspirants. The more informed we are, the better prepared we'll be to navigate these complexities and create a brighter future for India.
Until next time, keep those minds sharp and keep striving for a better tomorrow.